Hello, everyone. Sophia sat curled up on the couch, her legs tucked under her and fingers tapping nervously against the screen of her phone. On the other end, her best friend Mia's voice brimmed with energy and conviction. "You're not getting it," Mia insisted. "This isn't just a way to shake off the routine. It's about rediscovering yourself and bringing the spark back into your marriage." Sophia chewed on her lip, scrolling through old photos. There they were, she and Otis, grinning ear to ear on a sunlit beach, wrapped in each other's arms. Life felt so effortless back then. But now, 8 years into their marriage, the warmth between them had faded. "Are you really sure about this? Will it actually help?" she asked hesitantly. "Absolutely," Mia replied, her tone unwavering. "Look at Mason and me. He wasn't thrilled at first either, but now we're better than ever. You just have to explain that it's temporary. If you approach it right, he'll not only understand but even support you." Sophia couldn't ignore the weight of Mia's confidence. Her friend was the kind of person who never spoke without purpose, and she always had a way of making things happen. Even so, the idea felt outrageous. Still, Mia's words carried a certain pull. "Okay," Sophia murmured, the plan taking root in her mind. "I'll talk to him tonight, after dinner." The rest of the day was a blur of nerves. To set the stage, Sophia prepared Otis's favorite meal, shrimp pasta in a rich cream sauce. Dinner unfolded peacefully, their conversation light and peppered with laughter over a funny video Otis had shared. When the table was cleared and Otis settled onto the couch with a beer in hand, Sophia knew it was time. Summoning her courage, she sat beside him, cleared her throat, and said, "Otis, we need to talk." He turned to her, a flicker of concern crossing his face, but he stayed quiet, giving her the space to speak. "I know this might sound strange," she began, her palms damp with anxiety, "but I think we should try something new for our marriage." Otis raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. "New? What, like getting a dog? Or going on a vacation?" Sophia forced a smile, masking her unease. "Not quite. It's more an experiment. Something temporary to breathe new life into our relationship." She danced around the idea, careful not to dive straight into the heart of it. At first, Otis listened with mild surprise, but his expression darkened as her words began to sink in. "Wait," he interrupted, his tone sharpening. "Are you saying you want to date other men? Is that what this is?" Her cheeks flushed with heat. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "It's only for a little while, Otis. It's supposed to help us reconnect, to make us stronger in the end." The silence that followed was crushing. Otis clenched his fists, his face a mix of disbelief and cold anger. "And you really believe this is the answer to fixing our marriage?" he asked flatly. "Yes," she whispered. "Mia said it worked for her." Otis stood abruptly, pacing the room, her words ricocheting in his mind. When he finally stopped, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "If this is what you need, I won't stop you," he said, his voice distant. "But I have one condition." Sophia stiffened, bracing for the worst. "What condition?" He exhaled sharply. "While you're running this experiment, I'm moving into the spare bedroom." Her heart sank. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Because I can't share a bed with someone who's choosing to dismantle what we've built together," he replied, his tone hard as steel. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Otis didn't wait for her to respond. He turned and headed upstairs, leaving her frozen in place. His silhouette disappeared up the stairs, and the sound of his footsteps echoed down the hall. In the bedroom, Otis methodically packed his clothes, his movements mechanical and precise. Each shirt was folded neatly, each item carefully placed into the suitcase. Despite the calmness of his actions, anger simmered beneath the surface, his thoughts racing as he tried to process what Sophia had said. Minutes later, Sophia appeared in the doorway, hesitant and unsure. "You're really going to the spare room?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. Otis didn't look at her. "What did you expect?" he said, his tone clipped. "You think I'd just sit here and pretend this is fine?" Otis turned to face her, his expression blank and unreadable. "You said you wanted to try something new, so I'm giving you the space to do it," he said, his voice even and detached. Then, without another word, he resumed packing his things. Sophia stood frozen, trying to decipher his calmness. It unnerved her far more than if he had shouted. "Otis, this is only temporary," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You understand that, don't you?" He closed the suitcase with a soft click and looked at her, a faint, cold smile on his lips. "Everything we do in life is temporary," he replied simply. The weight of his words sent a chill through her, silencing any further argument. Desperate to bridge the growing gap, she whispered, "If you want, we can talk again. I don't want you to think this is easy for me." "There's no need," Otis replied, hoisting the suitcase off the bed. He moved toward the door with steady resolve. Sophia stepped forward instinctively but stopped short, unsure of what to say. Finally, she mustered, "I just want you to be happy." Pausing in the doorway, Otis turned back to her, his gaze steady but distant. "Are you happy, Sophia?" he asked. "If this is your idea of happiness, then maybe I'm not the person who can give it to you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the empty bedroom. The soft click of the spare bedroom door closing echoed through the house. Sophia lay awake in their bed that night, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts raced, colliding with each other at an unbearable pace. She had expected anger, perhaps even an argument, but his cold detachment was worse. "Tomorrow will be better," she told herself. "We'll talk over breakfast." But when she woke the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. As she walked downstairs, a sinking feeling grew in her chest. The hook by the door was empty. His keys and favorite jacket were gone. The corner by the door, usually cluttered with his shoes, was bare. Panic surged as she stepped into the kitchen. The coffee machine was spotless, its water tank empty. It was another sign. Otis always refilled it before bed. Rushing upstairs, she opened the door to the spare bedroom. The bed was meticulously made, every corner crisp and sharp. The drawers were empty, and the closet held no trace of him. Even his worn-out t-shirts, the ones he only wore around the house, were gone. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Each ring seemed to mock her rising anxiety. Finally, the call went to voicemail. "Otis, it's me," she said, her voice cracking. "Please call me back. I need to talk to you." She ended the call, her hands clutching the phone tightly. An hour passed as she paced through the house, searching for any clue of where he might have gone. Her thoughts churned, jumping between hope and despair. Finally, she scrolled through her contacts and hesitated over Mia's name before pressing the call button. "Mia, he's gone," Sophia blurted out the moment her friend picked up. "What do you mean, gone?" Mia asked, her voice sharp. "He's taken all his things. I've tried calling, but he's not answering," Sophia explained, her words tumbling over each other. "Calm down," Mia urged. "This is just his way of showing he's upset. You didn't really think he'd just agree without any reaction, did you? He's trying to scare you." Sophia glanced back at the empty room, her voice shaking. "This doesn't feel like a joke, Mia. There's nothing left. He's completely gone." "You need to stay calm," Mia insisted, her tone firm. "Men do this sometimes. It's a small protest, but they always come back. The key is to stay in control. Don't call him first. Let him come to you." Sophia hung up, uneasy with Mia's advice. The situation felt far beyond her control. As evening fell, desperation pushed her to reach out to mutual friends. The first name that came to mind was Liam, Otis's best friend. Taking a deep breath, she dialed his number. "Hi, Liam. Have you seen Otis?" "Otis, have you seen him?" Sophia asked, doing her best to keep her voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Liam finally replied. "No, Sophia, I don't know where he is," he said, but there was something in his tone, an edge that unsettled her. "Are you sure?" she pressed. "If he calls you, let him know I'm worried, okay?" "Of course," Liam answered curtly before ending the call. Sophia dialed a few more of Otis's friends and family members, but each call ended with either vague responses or an unhelpful silence. No one seemed to know, or wanted to admit, where Otis had gone. Meanwhile, Otis gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove along the highway. His mind swirled with a mix of betrayal, anger, and disappointment. Memories of their life together flashed through his mind. Their first dates, vacations, late-night talks filled with laughter, and now it all felt tainted by her suggestion of a temporary experiment. Pulling into a gas station, he stepped out of the car and inhaled the crisp, cold air, trying to steady himself. After a moment, he reached for his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, it's Otis," he said, his voice carefully measured. "You mentioned before that you had a spare room. Is it still available?" The person on the other end confirmed, and Otis gave a small nod, even though they couldn't see him. "Great. I'll be by tonight," he said before hanging up. That night, Otis settled into a small, modest room he'd rented from an old friend. The space was simple, a desk in one corner and a narrow bed in the other, but it was enough for now. Sitting down, he picked up his phone and stared at the screen. He had drafted a message to Sophia but couldn't bring himself to send it. With a sigh, he switched off the phone and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Despite the anger simmering inside him, he knew he needed to stay calm. He had a plan, and he intended to stick to it. Back at home, Sophia couldn't sit still. The silence of the house was suffocating, and the unanswered questions gnawed at her. Finally, she grabbed her coat, keys in hand, and headed out the door. She drove to the homes of several friends, hoping for some sign of Otis, but everywhere she went, she came up empty. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Returning home exhausted but still determined, Sophia vowed to keep searching. For the next week, she scoured motel parking lots and familiar places, hoping to spot his car. Every day she called his phone, leaving messages that grew increasingly desperate, but each call went unanswered. Slowly, an unsettling realization crept over her. Otis wasn't planning to come back. Not on her terms, anyway. One morning, after a sleepless night, the doorbell rang incessantly. Barely awake, Sophia shuffled to the door, still in her pajamas, her mind clouded with worry. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with Mia, who stood impeccably dressed, a large coffee in her hand. "You look awful," Mia said bluntly, her eyes scanning Sophia's disheveled appearance. "Thanks for the compliment," Sophia muttered, stepping aside to let Mia in. Mia walked to the kitchen table, setting her coffee down with practiced ease. "Look, I know this whole thing with Otis has thrown you off track, but you need to get it together. You've got work to focus on, and that's what matters right now," she said firmly. Sophia nodded but didn't respond. Mustering just enough energy to down a cup of coffee, she dragged herself to the office. As she entered the building, something felt off. Her usually warm and welcoming coworkers barely glanced her way, and whispers followed her down the hallway like an unwelcome shadow. "Something's wrong," she murmured to herself as she hung up her coat. Just then, a hushed voice reached her ears from behind. "Didn't you notice?" the whisper said. Mia, who had already skimmed the company-wide email, leaned against Sophia's desk. "Looks like there's a big meeting at 10 a.m., and you're on the list," she said, her tone uneasy. Sophia frowned. Impromptu meetings like this rarely brought good news. "That's strange," she muttered. "It's more than strange. It's unsettling," Mia added, settling on the edge of the desk. By the time 10 a.m. rolled around, Sophia's mind had conjured up dozens of scenarios, each worse than the last. Steeling herself, she walked into the executive conference room, where William and Kevin were already seated. Their pale faces and downcast eyes did nothing to calm her nerves. In the corner, the company's lawyer stood, a thick folder in hand. Across the table sat Mr. Harper, the department head, his expression heavy with exhaustion. To Sophia's surprise, Mia was also there, seated on the right. Her presence provided a flicker of comfort, though it was fleeting. "Have a seat, Sophia," Harper said, his voice laced with weariness. Sophia sat, trying to project calm despite the tension in the room. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone even but her heart racing. Harper exchanged a glance with the lawyer before addressing her. "We've received reports of activities that violate company policy. This involves you, as well as Mr. William and Mr. Kevin." Sophia's hands grew clammy. "I don't understand. What activities?" she asked, her voice tightening. The lawyer opened the folder and spread several documents and images across the table. Among them were photographs and screenshots. "We received an anonymous complaint," he explained. "It alleges that you've been using company time and resources for personal matters, which created a toxic work environment." He slid a photograph closer. It showed Sophia and Kevin leaving the warehouse after what could only be described as an off-hours meeting. Her face turned crimson. "This is a misunderstanding," Sophia said sharply, turning to Harper. "It doesn't seem like one when we've also received complaints from other employees about inappropriate conduct," Harper said, striving to remain calm. "Complaints from who?" Mia interjected, her tone firm. "The complainant chose to remain anonymous," the lawyer replied evenly. At that moment, William, who had been silent, slammed his fist on the table. "This is a setup. Someone's framing us," he exclaimed. "William, calm down," Sophia urged. Though her own voice wavered, Harper sighed and leaned back in his chair. "The company has no choice. To avoid further complications, all parties involved are to be suspended, pending immediate dismissal." His hands folded neatly in front of him, signaling that the decision was final. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs as the words sank in. The ground beneath her seemed to give way. As they left the office, Mia grabbed her elbow, steering her toward the warehouse. "This is insane," Sophia blurted once they stopped. "Who would do something like this?" "I don't know," Mia admitted, her voice tight, "but it's definitely deliberate. Someone wanted this to happen." Sophia covered her face with her hands, her voice breaking. "I've lost everything. My job, my husband. What's left?" "You can still fight this," Mia said, though for the first time, there was hesitation in her voice. "We have lawyers. We can take them on." But even Mia's once unshakable confidence seemed to falter. Over the next week, Sophia tried to hold it together, but events unraveled rapidly. Despite their efforts, a formal notice arrived. The company was terminating all parties involved, effective immediately. The news hit harder than anyone expected. Mia, who had always maintained an air of invincibility, looked genuinely shaken. To make matters worse, the scandal quickly spilled beyond the company. Gossip spread like wildfire through their community, stories of unprofessional behavior and misconduct. Sophia found herself at the mercy of rumors she couldn't control. Every interview she attended ended with the same awkward rejection. Her resume sat untouched, ignored by potential employers. Mia fared no better. Her once pristine reputation, carefully cultivated over the years, was now in tatters. Business contacts stopped returning her calls, and even her closest friends began to distance themselves. Eventually, Sophia returned home, her spirit crushed and her future uncertain. The walls of her once welcoming house now felt cold and uninviting. As she sat alone in the quiet, it dawned on her just how completely her life had unraveled. Alone and utterly overwhelmed, Sophia felt the crushing weight of her circumstances. She had no job, no support, and no Otis, once her anchor, who now refused to return to her life. His final response to her heartfelt letter was curt and devastating. "I don't want to see you anymore." Sophia stared at the screen, her chest hollowing out with an unbearable ache. Everything had unraveled because of her selfishness, her poor choices, and her misplaced trust and advice that had only led her astray. Now, all that remained was the daunting task of piecing her life back together. Each step forward felt like climbing a mountain, but despite the seemingly bottomless pit she had fallen into, Sophia resolved to try. She had to find a way to mend what she had shattered. Sitting in the kitchen, she stared at her laptop's empty screen, struggling to compose another letter to Otis. Her thoughts swung wildly, from guilt to anger, despair to hope. Finally, she managed to gather her courage and type. "Otis, I've come to realize the enormity of my mistake. I let myself be swayed by others' ideas, forgetting what truly mattered. This wasn't just an error in judgment. It was a betrayal of everything we built together. You didn't deserve this, and I am so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Please, give me the chance to prove that I can change." She reread the message multiple times, tweaking and adding lines, before hitting send. Now, all she could do was wait. Weeks passed before his response arrived. It was brief and to the point. Sophia, I've read your letters. Words aren't enough. If you truly want to fix this, show me through your actions. I'll be watching. Otis. Sophia read the email repeatedly, feeling a flicker of hope ignite. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had dared to dream. Okay, Otis, she whispered to herself. If you want action, you'll get it. The weeks that followed tested her resolve like never before. Otis kept his distance, only occasionally sending curt messages, each one more challenging than the last. He asked her to write a detailed list of the changes she was willing to make. That night, Sophia stayed up late, pouring her heart into the task. She laid everything bare: her faults, her missteps, her willingness to relinquish Mia's influence over her life. At the bottom of the list, she wrote, I am ready to give you control over our relationship. I know I broke it, and I am prepared to meet any conditions you set. Her fingers shook as she sent the email. A month passed before Otis finally called. Hearing his voice for the first time since that fateful evening sent a rush of emotion through her. Are you free tomorrow night? He asked, his tone steady, almost detached. Yes, she replied, her excitement barely contained. Good. Meet me at Willow Street Restaurant at 7. Don't be late. The next evening was brisk, but Sophia stood outside the restaurant 10 minutes early, ignoring the cold. She clutched her bag nervously, fiddling with its strap as she waited. Otis arrived at exactly 7, composed and confident. Hi, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Hi, he replied with a brief nod, motioning for her to follow him inside. Dinner was calm but restrained. Otis asked pointed questions about her job hunt, her reflections on their past, and how she envisioned their future. Sophia answered candidly, determined to convey her understanding of her mistakes. Are you ready to change everything? He asked, his gaze steady and piercing. Yes, she said, her voice unwavering. Good. Then here are my conditions, he said. Sophia nodded, her heart pounding as he laid them out. They were straightforward but demanding. Otis wanted complete control over their relationship. She would follow his instructions without argument. Most painfully, he insisted she cut all ties with Mia. Sophia hesitated but ultimately agreed, knowing it was the only way forward. The transition was difficult. Otis dictated how she spent her time, how she dressed, and how she structured her life. Severing ties with Mia, her closest confidant, was the hardest part. But Sophia understood it was necessary. Slowly, she adapted, focusing on listening to Otis and rebuilding his trust. Months passed, and Sophia worked tirelessly to prove herself. Each small success felt monumental, a step closer to regaining the life she had nearly lost. Sophia worked tirelessly to meet Otis's expectations, adjusting her every move to his requests without hesitation. Over time, he began to call her more frequently, stopping by the house more often. Their conversations became less formal, and the tension between them softened. Yet, Sophia knew she was far from the end of this road. Every action she took felt scrutinized, and the fear of making a single misstep loomed over her. One morning, Sophia was startled awake by the gentle chime of her alarm. Reaching out to silence it, she froze when the bedroom door opened slightly. Otis stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a business suit, a cup of coffee in hand. You overslept, he said matter-of-factly, setting the cup down on the bedside table. Sophia shot out of bed, her pulse quickening. Punctuality was something he had drilled into her as non-negotiable. I'm sorry, she began, but Otis raised his hand to cut her off. No excuses. Just start the day right. You have 10 minutes to be ready, he said before disappearing as quickly as he'd come. 10 minutes later, Sophia was in the kitchen, bustling to prepare breakfast. Otis sat at the table with a newspaper, occasionally glancing up to observe her. Every glance felt like an evaluation. The coffee should be hotter next time, he commented, sipping from his cup. Yes, of course, Sophia murmured, keeping her eyes on the stovetop. Their mornings had settled into a routine. Otis gave instructions, and Sophia complied, doing her best to adjust to his standards. After breakfast, Otis rose, grabbed his briefcase, and headed to the door. I'll be home at 8 tonight. Make sure dinner is ready. We'll go over the task list then, he said without looking back. Sophia nodded. Of course. The door closed with a decisive thud, leaving her in silence. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Her life was unrecognizable, but she reminded herself that this was the price of saving their marriage. Her day passed in a blur of cleaning, shopping, and planning dinner. Otis had insisted she leave her job to dedicate herself entirely to managing the household. At first, the idea felt alien, even stifling, but over time, Sophia came to see the logic in his demand. By 8 p.m., the house was spotless, and a hot meal was ready on the table. Sophia had changed into the dress Otis had selected for her earlier in the week and straightened her hair in front of the mirror. Hearing the front door open, she hurried to greet him. "Hi," she said as he entered the dining room. Otis nodded briefly before sitting down to eat. Sophia sat across from him, silently watching, prepared to respond to any request. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Otis opened his laptop and brought up a document he called the task list. "So, what did you accomplish today?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the screen. Sophia began listing her chores: grocery shopping, laundry, and cleaning. Otis nodded as he typed. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow, you'll meet my brother. He'll take me to the game this weekend, and I want you to help him get the car ready." "Of course," Sophia replied, jotting down the task in her notebook. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Otis spoke again. "You're doing well," he said, his tone softer than usual. "But I can still sense traces of the pride that nearly destroyed us." Sophia stiffened, unsure of how to respond. "This structure isn't a punishment," he continued. "It's a way to rebuild what we lost." "I understand, Otis," she said quietly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this together." Months passed, and Sophia settled into the rhythm of her new life. Every aspect of her day was meticulously planned, leaving no room for independent decisions. Strangely, she began to feel a sense of peace in the order. One evening, Otis surprised her with an invitation to dinner at a restaurant, a rare outing since their reconciliation. "You deserve it," he said simply as they sat at a cozy table. Sophia smiled. "Thank you, Otis." Taking her hand, Otis looked into her eyes. "I'm glad you finally understood what true devotion means." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she nodded, overwhelmed by a bittersweet sense of accomplishment and longing. "I've always loved you," Sophia whispered, her voice soft but steady. Otis looked at her, a warmth in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. "Me too, Sophia," he replied, his tone genuine. 2 years had passed, and the home they now shared had become a reflection of their transformed relationship. Everything within its walls was in perfect order, just like their marriage. Every item had its designated place, and every action had a purpose. Sophia had not only embraced Otis's rules, but also found comfort and stability in them. What once felt restrictive now provided a sense of security she hadn't realized she craved. Her battle for independence felt like a distant memory, replaced by gratitude for the steadiness Otis brought into her life. Their monthly progress discussions had become a ritual, a cornerstone of their new life together. One evening, as usual, Otis sat at the dining table with his laptop open. Sophia, dressed neatly in a dress he had picked out, served tea before taking her seat across from him. "So, Sophia," he began, his tone even but attentive, "let's review the month." Sophia opened her notebook and began listing the tasks and achievements she had accomplished over the past weeks. Her voice carried a newfound confidence, though she occasionally glanced at him, gauging his reactions. Otis listened intently, nodding here and there. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, a rare smile playing on his lips. "Good job," he said, closing the laptop. "I can see you're putting in the effort." A warm feeling of pride spread through Sophia's chest. "Thank you, Otis," she said quietly. He stood, walked over to her, and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You've made the right choice, Sophia. You've proven that you can change." She met his gaze and replied softly, "It's all for us." "Exactly," he said. Their life seemed to settle into a harmonious rhythm, but deep down, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something more subtle underpinned their dynamic. She knew equality would never return to their relationship, but she also understood that this imbalance was the price she had willingly paid for a second chance. When Otis announced one evening that he wanted them to move to a new, larger house, Sophia agreed without hesitation. "It's a new chapter for us," he explained. The house was spacious and modern, a symbol of their shared progress. Sophia threw herself into organizing and decorating it according to Otis's preferences. Her days were dedicated to creating a home that would make him happy. Years passed, and Sophia found herself on the terrace of their new home, watching Otis play in the garden with their young son. The scene was serene, a picture of the peace she had long sought. When Otis approached her, he extended a hand to help her up. "Are you happy?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. She nodded, her answer unwavering. "Yes, I'm happy." And it was true. The doubts and regrets that had once lingered were gone. Sophia had found her place, even if it wasn't the life she had once envisioned. She had traded independence for stability, equality for family. But as Otis wrapped his arms around her, Sophia allowed herself to smile, knowing she had found what mattered most to her. She may have surrendered certain freedoms, but in their place, she had built a family, and that was everything to her. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.